Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Criminal Intentions, Season 1, Episode 1, The Cardigans, by Mccade, narrated by Curt Bonnem. 0. Anatomy of a Crime Scene. Darien Park doesn't know he's dead yet. He's high on the taste of sugar candy lips, drunk on the thrill of body to body. His blood runs the color of flickering lights, glitter hot in his veins, and when the music pounds through him, he's a heartbeat in motion, twisting through the tangle of writhing flesh stretched from wall to wall in the packed club. Hands try to grasp him, draw him close, possess him, but he flirts and slides just out of reach. He isn't for these men. He isn't for anyone. Darien is wild. And after the shittiest breakup of his life, he's not ready to let another man tie him down. He's drugged on the power of his own body by the time the hot, sweet burn of 3 strawberry sangria shots, downed all in a row, evaporates off his tongue and fizzles in his veins. He's sparks lit to gasoline, ready to make bad decisions. And though he tells himself to walk away before one of those bad decisions has a voice and a name and the touch of rough-knuckled hands over Darien's skin, he already knows the empty ache in the pit of his stomach won't let him leave all by himself. He's fireworks shooting into the sky, and he doesn't want to burst alone. 1 cigarette, he thinks. 1 cigarette to clear his head, then he'll decide. Eeny, meeny, miny, moe. This little piggy, that little piggy. 1, 2, I choose you. Someone's waiting to go home with him tonight, but first he needs to shake his buzz. He steps out the side exit near the bar, escaping from the groin-deep pulse of bass into the quieter sounds of stop-and-start traffic. The alley smells like rain on pavement and the shades of smokers past, their haunts in the butts piled against the club's brick wall. He lights up, takes that deep drag of fire flowing fierce and warm down into his throat, and contemplates the memory of a man with close-cropped hair and deep hazel eyes, who, as Darien flirted just out of his reach, had briefly let out a sweet and thrilling growl that licked its tongue down Darien's back to knot in the hollow of his spine. Him, Darien decides, and taps the ash from his cigarette. Embers flicker, fall, die before they strike the pavement, and a stinging band of pain snaps around his neck, cutting a line of scraping acid into his flesh. He doesn't feel the cigarette falling from his fingers. The cigarette is already a moment past, gone, forgotten. All other moments have fled, everything before, everything after. There is only now, the struggle to breathe, the ripping tumble of his heart, the confusion of his pulse, the way the streetlights blur into watercolor streaks, melting across his vision, the sensation of something cold and slick beneath his grasping fingers, pressed too tight against his neck to pry free. It's squeezing, crushing, and every breath is a knot. He's strangely aware that the choking cord wrapped around his neck grows warmer with every passing second, absorbing the heat of his body, stealing it away as if stealing his life. He can smell someone, the musk of their body rushing in on each inhalation. Everything is slow, so slow. His thoughts, his pulse, his heart, fading away until it's as muted as the club's ongoing bass thrombosis filtered through insulating brick walls. He is brick, heavy. He wants to struggle, but can't. His limbs are wood, his feet anchored by their own weight. It's quick, so quick. He's dying, just like that. He knows the taste of his own fear, and it's yellow and vaguely sour, and curdles the last remnants of strawberries left on his tongue. And then he's gone. His cigarette, forgotten, lies in a puddle, its cherry glow gone dark, its paper soaking up the last of the Baltimore evening rain. 1. A Nameless Man. Malcolm Khalaji licked the taste of sweat from taut, pale skin, gathering the salt of maleness on his tongue, languishing in that particular scent, flavor, ineffable something that came at just that perfect moment of satiation when the body beneath him went limp, and there was only the mingled rush of shared gasping breaths and the heat of flesh slowly relaxing around the ache of his cock. The lean, pretty young man beneath him laughed huskily, quiet vibratos shaking them both. His death grip on Malcolm's shoulders peeled away, relieving crescent moons of stinging pain one at a time. The man tossed his head back against Malcolm's pillows, nestled against a damp tangle of hair. His smile was sly, his lips swollen and pink and kiss-bitten. "Do you want to know my name now?" he asked, and Malcolm chuckled, sinking down against him, brushing his lips to the pointed peak of his chin. "I might be vaguely interested." But he groaned as his phone rang on the nightstand, its trill demanding and sharp. "Though not right now."
"Who's calling you at 3 a.m.?
"Work," Malcolm answered, then gripped the man's hips and separated their bodies with a hiss for sensitized flesh and the drag of friction. He fell against the headboard, caught up his phone, and swiped the call. "Khalaji." "Got a body," Captain Zarate E. Salazar clipped off, exhaustion ragging the edges of her voice like ripped paper. "Central District, 600 block of West Lexington." Malcolm closed his eyes, rubbing his temples. "Now?" "It's not another last call loss. I need you on scene." "I'll be there." He let the call drop and rolled out of bed, reaching for his pants. The nameless man sprawled against the brushed wrought bronzework of Malcolm's headboard, a sylph with a fringe of fanning lashes so light they shone nearly white, shadowing eyes a pale and laughing shade of green. Those eyes laughed at Malcolm even now, as they tracked him through dragging on his slacks and shrugging into a button-down.
"What kind of job calls you out at this time of night?"
"Homicide." Malcolm pulled his shoulder holster from its place of honor hanging from the bedpost and slid his arm into the strap. "Lock the door when you leave." He caught up his coat and slung it on, striding for the door. The nameless man's voice drifted after him, lilting, mocking.
"You trust me alone in your flat?"
"What are you going to do?" Malcolm tossed over his shoulder. "Steal from a cop?" The nameless man's laughter trailed him into the night, as Malcolm let his apartment door close and vaulted the stairs two at a time to the streets that waited, every night, to deliver another cold corpse in a body bag. Another cold corpse, and a case that might never be solved if he didn't find a break within the first 48. He carried too many of those cases inside him. Too many dead ends. Too many losses. Not that a win could bring the dead back to life. Malcolm didn't have that power, and he'd given up on saving lives long ago. By the time he got to them now, it was already too late. 2. A street corner in monochrome. By the time Malcolm arrived on scene, Captain Zarate was already stepping out of her unmarked car, the sleek black Audi throwing back the flashing red and blue of the uniformed unit's bars. Malcolm slung his Camaro into a curbside slot, with his bumper almost kissing her taillights, took a moment to sweep his hair back into a messy bun and snap an elastic over it, then slid out of the car. The night smelled like stale Jell-O shots, gasoline, and blood steaming in the lingering smolder of an autumn evening, where September chill had settled in the night air, but the pavement was unwilling to let go of the boiling heat it had absorbed throughout the day. Every crime scene had its own scent, but at the heart of each was the scent of blood. Even the ones who died without a single wound, stiff in their beds of cardiac arrest, or necks purpled with the sawing marks of rope and fingers, or bloated with the strange, sick colors of poison. Somehow they still smelled of that cloyingly sharp, strangely electric scent of blood. Maybe what Malcolm called the scent of blood was really just the scent of death. Zarate lingered by her car, her hands on her spare, angular hips, lines of exhaustion creasing beneath dark brown eyes. Even at this time of night, she was sharp in flared slacks, a severely buttoned shirt, and a stylish suit coat. Malcolm had never seen her not perfectly on point and ready to present the picture of confident authority, even at 3 a.m. She took a few restless steps, running her fingers through her short crop of black hair. He quickened his stride and fell in at her side. Together, they approached the mouth of the alley to one side of Baltimore's more prominent gay clubs, a significant cross-section of Baltimore's queer community milled in upset tangles near the club entrance, including a number of U of M college queers, all corralled by harried-looking officers whose raised voices tried to separate patrons from staff. Several uniforms clustered at the very threshold of the alleyway, like vampires afraid to cross onto hallowed ground, leaning in. One turned away, covering his mouth as he made heaving sounds into his palm. Malcolm arched a brow, then glanced at Zarate. "I wasn't expecting you to be here," he said.
"This is a bit of a special case."
"Why?" Her wide, starkly bony shoulders jerked in something that wasn't quite a shrug. She said nothing until they reached the cluster of officers, who parted before them, nearly skittering out of the way. A body lay in the alleyway, sprawled half on the street, half slumped against the wall. A fairly well-built young man, his neck striated with angry red lines, brown hair flopping across his waxy face in a disarrayed mess. Not someone easily overpowered, Malcolm thought, already cataloging the crime scene. He had that club queer body, hard-honed, powerful sinew bunched in corded forearms, straining against a tight T-shirt in pale blue spattered with collateral spray and dark spots, dried by now to near black. And he likely would have been tall, if he still had his legs, rather than ragged, sawed-off stumps protruding from the shreds of his blood-soaked jeans. Malcolm tilted his head. That was new. Sickening. Interesting. More interesting than the fact that someone must have caught him off guard to overpower him. Even more interesting, though, was the man crouched over the body, hovering like a crow with the black wings of his long coat folded around him. He was tall and lean and square of shoulder, with a shag of black hair falling across a face made entirely of angles positioned in sharp opposition until he was a razor of pale golden skin. His full, sullen mouth stood out against his skin like a bruise, and that mouth tightened as he carefully lifted a red-drenched shred of denim in latex-gloved fingers, examining it closely through narrowed, slightly angled eyes.
"Him,"
Zarate said. Malcolm frowned. "He's not forensics. Fed?"
"No."
Zarate heaved a heavy sigh.
"Transfer from LAPD. Just processed his papers yesterday."
Suspicion prickled on the back of Malcolm's neck. "What are you not telling me?"
"You're working with him on this case."
"No." It came out before he could stop it, quick enough to more than earn the flat, expectant look Zarate fixed on him. He sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Why?"
"He wanted this case," she answered. "Said it's personal."
"Personal how?" Again that angular jerk of her shoulders. That was Zarate, all sticks bound together with steel bolts and razor wire, her movements full of kinetic tension, and bristling with potential energy barely caged in the thin shell of brown skin.
"Gay kid gets murdered, gay cop takes interest," she said tersely.
Malcolm let his gaze drift back to the dark-haired man, then to the empty face of the victim. Malcolm had been young like that once, young and drunk on his own strength and raw vitality, chasing sex and some facsimile of love in dark, smoky rooms, kisses that bristled with the raw burn of stubble and the taste of deep, heady bourbon, clasping hands and sighs that came out like a secret. He could see himself in the corpse's blank eyes, and it made his stomach sink. "Yeah,"
I get that, he murmured. I do. He sighed. So, it's a short-term thing for this case. Zarate's mouth did an odd, twisty thing. She avoided his eyes. Angelie.
We'll talk. Focus on the case. Fix it.
She pinned him with a hard look.
Before any more dead gay kids show up.
He ground his teeth. But an order was an order, and Zarate had enough on her shoulders. She didn't need him throwing a tantrum about working with a partner, even if he had his doubts already. The new guy looked so young, so stiff, and like he was a stickler for procedure. Malcolm wasn't particularly fond of procedure. He eyed Zarate. Did you show up just to make sure I'd behave? When she said nothing, he tilted his head back, closing his eyes. You could have told me over the phone.
If I told you over the phone, you might have refused to come.
He opened his eyes and flung her a foul look. I'm not that bad.
Keep telling yourself that.
Zarate turned away, her long, swinging strides taking her back toward her car.
I'm heading into the office early. Since I'm up, I'm up. Be good.
When am I ever not? She only snorted, then paused, glancing over her shoulder.
Oh, and Malcolm?
Yes?
He outranks you. Be nice.
And while he stared dismayed, she smirked and strutted merrily away, lifting a hand to throw a wave over her shoulder. Malcolm exhaled heavily. For fuck's sake. But there was a dead guy in the alleyway, and new guy or not, it was Malcolm's job to do something about it. That kid probably had a family, friends, someone who loved him. Malcolm never made promises to catch the one who'd taken that light out of someone's life. Not when it was too easy for people to get away. Cases growing colder and colder after the first 48 hours. But that didn't mean he wouldn't try. He crossed the threshold into the alley and circled the pool of blood, making a corona around the stumps of the Vic's legs. Still wet enough to throw back colored shimmers from the rainbow lights strobing the front of the club and spilling into the alley. He doubted the body was over an hour old. He sank into a crouch across from the new guy. The other man glanced up, his body tensing, his expression sharp and waiting. Malcolm flipped his badge from inside his coat, held it up long enough for the man to see, then diverted his attention to the body. Up close, the ligature marks on the neck were even more obvious. Narrow, overlapping lines in sawed-in bands that broke the skin in multiple places, abraded raw to let the blood seep out, smear, and coagulate. Malcolm fished one of a half-dozen pairs of disposable clear vinyl gloves from his coat pocket and snapped them on, then pried the victim's right eyelids apart. Red capillaries nearly swallowed the white, burst and spreading to touch the edges of darkened blue irises. Typical conjunctivitis by strangulation. He frowned and reached behind the body, fishing for his back pocket delicately, careful not to dislodge the position of the corpse's limbs. Gingerly, he slid 2 fingers in until he found the victim's wallet, eased it, and barely caught a phone before it fell out with the wallet, angling it into his palm with the wallet still held between 2 fingers. He swiped the phone screen, but it was passcode locked. The only notification on the lock screen was a text preview from the moms asking, "Are you planning to come home for Thanksgiving?" He slid the phone gingerly back into the victim's back pocket, then flipped the wallet open. Those vacant blue eyes grinned up at him, now bright with arrogance above a cheesy, cocky smile. Darien Park, 21. God, barely even old enough to be in this damned bar. A University of Maryland student ID card was tucked in behind his license. A wad of 20s sat untouched in the billfold section. A Chase Bank debit card in the card holder. Death by strangulation. Removal of the limbs for either fetishistic or vengeful reasons. No financial motivation. No attempt to conceal the identity of the victim. Fuck. This was going to be a hard one. The new guy hadn't said a word, only continuing to study the body fixedly while Malcolm studied him. Pretty, but in a sort of vicious fox-like way. No, not fox-like. He reminded Malcolm more of a feral cat that condescended to tolerate a human presence, but the moment that human came too close, he'd be off with a hiss and a flick of his tail. Something about the tension of him, the intensity of his focus, the set of his jaw. Yeah, he was going to be a hard one, too. Malcolm propped his elbows on his knees, the victim's wallet dangling from his fingertips. "What's your take?" The other man didn't answer. At first, he leaned in, hovering over the body, and caught the victim's jaw in gloved fingertips, carefully tipping his head to one side to get a closer view at the neck. Then, "This was planned," he murmured. He had a voice like silk and cigarette smoke, smooth and dark, with a certain husky raw edge underscored by a faint fluid hint of an accent Malcolm couldn't quite place. "They came with tools to do this, prepared in advance." He flicked a sharp gaze at Malcolm, eyes so black they blended with the thick fan of his lashes, before looking back to the ligature marks on the victim's throat. "Abrasions indicate steel wire used as a garrote from the spiral pattern." He released the victim's jaw and plucked at the shredded, bloody edges of his jeans, peeling them back to expose the raw stumps. "I would gather, from the ragged edges, that the lower legs were removed with a hacksaw." Malcolm eyed the grisly, chewed-up mess of the victim's legs. Blood had crusted and coagulated in black gelatinous clumps, clinging to muscle and fatty tissue so shredded it looked like pulled pork. He could hardly see the sawed-off ends of the femurs past the mangled tissue, but when he leaned in close, he observed what looked like flat sawed ends demonstrating subtle ridging, grooves that might come from a saw. "Sawtooth marks," he said, then tilted his head as something caught his eye past the smears of blood on the unbroken skin above the cuts. He squinted. Pale sky blue was visible just above where the legs cut off, fragments that looked like they'd been drawn on the skin with marker only to be half sawn through. "Marker? The perp marked before cutting." "Likely measuring. Based on the proportions of the remains, the cuts were made precisely 6 inches above the kneecap." "Risky behavior, doing this in an alley easily visible from the street." The other man's gaze flicked over the corpse, before he stripped one glove off with a snap of latex and pulled the sleeve of his coat back to bare his wristwatch. "I will need confirmation from forensics, but I would estimate time of death between an hour and an hour and a half ago, based on coagulation. The range for time of death would either raise or minimize risk, depending on if the forensic examiner determines it was before or after last call." "That gives the perp a narrow, safe window. So, we either have an opportunist or a risk-taker." "Or both." Malcolm lingered on the other man, cool and calm even when looking at a legless, mutilated body. Focused. Precisely spoken, every word measured with thought and intent behind it. Either he had more experience than that smooth, unlined face indicated, or he was prone to detachment. Detachment had its own problems, but at least Malcolm wouldn't have to deal with someone soft, untested, breaking down at the sight of some of the gruesome things perps did to dead bodies on these streets. It was hard enough for Malcolm to look at them sometimes. He didn't think he had it in him to coddle someone else, especially not someone who looked as young as this one did. He had to be early 30s at the latest, at least 10 years Malcolm's junior. He frowned, flipping the wallet open again and rifling through. "Both would indicate the victim was selected specifically, rather than the easiest available target." "Which would lead one to believe the perpetrator was someone who knew his habits well enough to know he would be here near last call and would step out for a cigarette." That red blossom of a mouth settled into a frown. "Wallet, cards, and money untouched. He is still wearing an expensive bracelet. He was the motivator, not his belongings."
So we're looking at a premeditated murder with a specific target.
It is a possibility.
Other possibilities?
The man made a rough sound in the back of his throat. Have you recently dealt with any other murders of gay or bisexual young men involving missing body parts? Malcolm tilted his head back, flicking through the last few months of cases, flashing crime scene photos through his mind's eye.
Yes, gay or bisexual men. 4 of them. No missing body parts. They were classed as hate crimes or crimes of passion. 2 accidents.
Were any others garroted?
1. Another college student, if I'm remembering the right case.
The man stood, unfolding himself and dusting off the black jeans clinging to long legs. He snapped his other glove off and bundled it with the first, then slipped both into his coat pockets along with both hands. I would like to see the case file. Malcolm stood as well, looking at the other man, and looking up. He blinked. That didn't happen often. At 6'1", he outstripped average height, but the new guy had a couple of inches on him. The man was watching him, waiting expectantly. Malcolm fought back a grimace. Behave, he told himself.
I'd like to know your name.
Yoon, he answered after an almost calculated moment of consideration. Malcolm fished in his pocket for one of his rolling stock of evidence bags, slotted the victim's wallet in, and tucked it into his coat before peeling his own gloves off and offering his hand.
Khalaji.
Black eyes flicked down to his hand, then back up to his face. Yoon's hands remained firmly in his coat pockets. The case file. Malcolm closed his eyes and breathed in deep. Be nice.
At the office,
he said, letting his hand fall and retreating a step, opening his eyes again.
I want to spend a little time with the crime scene first.
He took a few more strides back, letting himself get a wider view from deeper in the alley. Yoon obligingly stepped aside, leaving Malcolm's line of sight clear. He let his gaze unfocus, just taking in the full picture, letting it solidify before he scanned for details. Cigarette butt in a puddle from early evening rainfall, probably the Vicks from the position of the fall and proximity to the body, barely burned down at all, not scuffed or stubbed. Mental note to have forensics bag it for DNA swabbing. Dumpster off kilter, angle indicating movement by force. Darien Park had kicked it, Malcolm thought. There'd been no one in front of him, so when he'd kicked out, when he'd struggled, he'd hit the dumpster. There were 2, small ones to either side of the rear exit door. The other was unmoved. The door itself was metal, once painted, now rusted down to peeling, jagged flakes, the topmost layer so corroded it curled back in dangerously sharp edges that could easily cut. Dark stains on those edges. Could be current or old blood stains. Another check for forensics. Possibility of perp's blood if they'd come up behind the Vic only to be slammed back against the door as Darien struggled. And brightly colored scraps of thread caught on those jagged metal edges. What do you see? Yoon asked.
He didn't feel like he was in danger,
Malcolm answered, finally letting his gaze circle back to the body.
He had no reason to. Either he knew the person who killed him, or he didn't even see it coming. There's not a single other offensive mark on the body.
He circled the corpse, drifting closer to Yoon.
Either they were strong enough to overpower him, or small enough that they had to use guile over strength. And there's this.
He stopped next to Yoon, and next to the club's rear exit.
Look.
Yoon leaned in, peering at the threads, pastel blue soaked in mottled reddish black. Not the victim's. His shirt is not torn.
Could be a lead. What do you see?
Yoon paused, his brows knitting, lips parting. He hesitated long moments, then said, This feels intimate. There was no hate here. He sank down into a crouch once more, the crow descending, gaze locked.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?